Okay. Well, Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom.
I decided I didn't feel like feeling like so much of a teacher sitting up high on them. And they built the stage out. I was like, this is too much. So I'm going to sit down here. Because hopefully we'll have, it's one of those days where I need everybody to talk. So we're gonna have some good discussion. I do have notes that I scribbled down after thinking all week, what are we going to talk about? Reading commentaries, what are we going to talk about? Because normally I like type out notes and stuff, and I was like, I don't know what, and so I kept kind of resisting like what the Lord was saying to me. So this is like one of those times when you're kind of at the mercy of what the Lord is saying to the teacher, and then that's all I got. So you kind of have to go with me where the Lord took me this week.
Good portion.
It is a really good portion, and and there's a lot we could talk about, and so again, as always, it's like, what should we focus on? But anyway, I'm going to pray first, so that I can hopefully have some level of focus today. My brain's a little all over the place. So Lord, we just thank you for Shabbat. We thank you for the Torah, for your word, for the opportunity to study it, for the opportunity to hear from you about what you want to say to us through your scripture that was written thousands of years ago, but still teaches us so much about your character. Lord, I just ask that you would be present with us. I ask that you would highlight what you want to have highlighted, and that you would guide the conversation and the discussion and the questions, and that we would walk away from this time with a deeper sense of who you are and how you want us to live our lives. B'Shem Yeshua. Amen. So, the last portion of Genesis. So, we have blessing. The two main themes I saw were blessing and death. So, because we have the death of both Jacob and Joseph, which seemed really kind of the portions kind of about their deaths kind of really stuck out to me. And I'm doing a messianic reading plan to read through the Bible in a year. And so I have a portion from the Torah that goes with the Torah portion, but they split it up for each day. And then a section out of the prophets and the writings and the New Covenant. And so it was interesting this week as I was reading about the death of Jacob and Joseph, I was reading about the death of Saul and Jonathan, and I was reading, and then it was making me think of, actually I was reading about the death of Yeshua as well. So I was like, this is really interesting. So of course in this week before Christmas, when we celebrate the birth of Yeshua, we're going to talk about death. So here we go. But we can talk about, but I do want to touch on the blessing, Jacob's blessing over Ephraim and Manasseh, and then I don't know that I would consider Jacob's blessings over his 12 sons to be blessings. They're more prophecies. So, which that's even like what it said in one of the commentaries, and I was like, oh, I like that better. That's a much easier way to think about it, because you think of it as blessings, and you start reading, you're like, there's an awful lot of recounting of wrongs and reprimanding to be considered blessings. So I like framing it as kind of some prophecy a little bit better. That's a little bit easier for me to handle. So, and then I also kind of just, if we have time, touch on, because this is the last portion of Genesis, and the transition from Genesis to Exodus shifts the narrative, the way that the story is even told, because we're kind of at the end of this patriarchal age with the end of Genesis, moving into Moses' life, and of course the Exodus itself and things like that. So if we have time, we might just kind of talk back through like what we might want to remember about Genesis and about the patriarchal age as we start looking at Exodus. I like summary things and I like reviews. I guess it's the teacher in me. I don't know. So anyway, we have the last few verses of chapter 47, Genesis 47, and then 48 is this blessing of Ephraim and Manasseh. So let's talk a little bit about that first. So, of course, Jacob is old and blind, going blind, and Joseph brings his sons to him. And this blessing has some similarities to previous ones. So we've talked over the last several months, I guess, with Genesis, couple months with Genesis, about blessings and about how they work. And so we again have this pattern where Jacob is blessing the younger. He crosses his hands, right? He has the two boys. Tradition is the right hand goes on the older and gives the firstborn blessing, and the left hand goes on the younger. Crosses over, so the younger gets the firstborn blessing again. But what is significant about the way that he is blessing Ephraim and Manasseh that's different than a blessing that he's had before? I'm kind of just jumping right in, not building all this context for you, but.
Blessing the younger.
He is blessing the younger. But he's blessing them. Where's the verse? So chapter 48, verse 5. So now your two, so this is Jacob talking to Joseph. So now your two sons who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to Egypt, they are mine. Yeah. Ephraim and Manasseh will be mine, just like Reuben and Simeon. Any descendants of yours whom you father after them will be yours. They will be identified by the names of their brothers for their inheritance. Now, as for me, and he goes on to recount. So this is very interesting. Why is Jacob saying that Joseph's sons are his?
That's what I want to know.
Well, he also, though, justifies it by saying that Rachel died along the way. So, in a sense, it's like he wants to place Rachel as their mother rather than this Egyptian woman. Because by doing that, by claiming them, he's kind of doing that. And then also, when we see further in with the 12 tribes set up and disbursements and what, you see this big thing unfold, especially with Ephraim. But yeah, when I was taking a look at that too, because it was like he justified it by saying, well, Rachel died, so therefore, but then also later it's like, I never thought I'd see you or these boys again.
Right.
But even when he does the blessing over Ephraim and Manasseh, but when he does the blessing, he says he blessed Joseph and said to them. So he's still tying that to Joseph's blessing.
Yeah. Yeah, and so this comes into question. So we talk about the 12 tribes of Israel, right? We know Jacob had 12 sons, except there's no tribe of Joseph, right? And then you mix that with the fact that when they go in the land, each tribe gets an inheritance, except the Levites don't get their own land because their inheritance is the service of the tabernacle and later the temple. So it kind of plays into, and he also calls out Reuben and Simeon, who both have, who even later in his blessings that are actually prophecies section calls them out for their wrongdoing, which are huge. And so it's almost, but except we still have tribes of them. So it's like, so this is the confusing thing. There's 12 tribes except for there's not in Israel. And so this comes into play later in the land inheritance because Ephraim and Manasseh will inherit land because there's no tribe of Joseph, and the Levites don't get land. So that's how there's still 12 there. But then with the 12 sons, they call Ephraim and Manasseh half tribes. He plays in, we're not going to get into all that detail, but just wanted to mention some of that because like when you read later it gets confusing of who are these 12 tribes, and why is Joseph, why is there no tribe of Joseph? Like, that kind of bothers me. Like, Joseph is this, like, righteous person, and yet it's almost like his mind is split a little bit. I don't know. That's maybe not the correct way to think about that, but.
Joseph got a special piece of land, though, that his father took from the Amorites, like that owned one piece of property, and then it would seem that his kids, through Joseph gets a double portion,
That's what I was
Yeah.
thinking.
right,
Yeah.
as by the
That's
kids.
true. Yeah, that is true.
So Reuben doesn't get the firstborn,
Right.
which would have been like a double portion,
Right.
but Joseph does.
But Joseph kind of does. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true. That is a way that he kind of does. And then, but then it's like it gets further complicated because then Judah gets this amazing blessing, and we know the Messiah comes from Judah. And so it's like, what? But anyway.
It splits, that double blessing of the land and everything. Seems like the double portion of the land goes to the kids, and then the scepter, that line of Messiah goes to Judah.
Yeah.
Right? It's not going through one kid anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, which is really interesting and plays back even into this. And of course, all of this again highlights the idea that God tends to do things differently than how
He can do what he wants.
he, yeah.
Well
He
said.
can do what he wants. And it is, yeah, it's this interesting, like, it's almost like, yeah, I kind of like how you said that, Richie, like the kind of almost like splitting or spreading out the blessing, because it really, like, you know, in ancient culture, the firstborn, that's a big deal. You get everything. And not that the others don't get, it's not that they get nothing, but it's very disproportionate. And I think the hope is in a good family that, you know, the firstborn who's getting all this inheritance would help take care of the rest of the family. I mean, I think that that's the hope, but we know that people are not always quite that generous toward each other. But yeah, and so it's this interesting situation. So yeah, and we have this, and then as Lori kind of pointed out, like this blessing, when he's blessing the Ephraim and Manasseh, he says, but now I'm blessing Joseph, which I think there actually is a dispute about translation, and there's a couple different ancient texts that have a slightly different verb there, but that's not my area of expertise. But some say it should say that he blessed the boys, and some's like Joseph, and I'm like, whatever. So it's, and I was gonna look.
As a parent, though, when somebody blesses my
Yes.
kids, they bless me.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
Why does he say they're mine? What does that exactly mean?
I mean, he's taking them on as he's saying they're his sons. They're
Okay.
credited to as Jacob's sons and not Joseph's.
Okay.
So, and that's why we're bringing in this whole, so some commentators say it's because Rachel died and couldn't bear any more children because she died giving birth to Benjamin. So I don't know, but then there's this comment about Reuben and Simeon, and so it's like, is there more
Okay.
righteousness there? Like, it's a little bit hard to exactly piece out the why behind all of that, because we don't. Again, it's Genesis. We don't have all the information.
Right.
Yeah.
But saying they are mine is Jacob saying these are, you know, it's as if they're his sons and not Joseph's sons.
Okay.
Can,
So what
can,
difference does that make in their inheritance? I mean, actually, he was near death.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so they would receive inheritance from Jacob. Except what's interesting, I mean, and this is why I wouldn't necessarily consider chapter 49 blessings, because he's not portioning out inheritance there, and he names Joseph and not Ephraim and Manasseh there. But and that's again where this comes into play when as the tribes develop, and then eventually as they move into the land and they're portioning out the land, because it's Ephraim and Manasseh that are part of those processes, and not specifically Joseph, even though they're his kids, so it's kind of Joseph. But again, like we could look at it as like a double portion type of situation, but basically Jacob is taking them on as his kids, and so they are then in line with the rest of his sons.
could one say that because Joseph and Benjamin were the favorites of Jacob, that Ephraim and Manasseh were considered a part of that favoritism? And because Judah advocated for Joseph,
Mm-hmm.
he received a blessing as
Mhm.
well.
Yeah, it does seem that the favoritism plays into this.
Yeah.
Because I think part of this too is, because as it kind of talks about through here, and as we kind of see the end of this portion of the narrative play out, it is definitely this whole, like, I never thought I would see you again. It's almost as if Joseph, even though we know Joseph didn't actually die, to Jacob it's as if he had been resurrected.
Mhm.
Because to Joseph, he had died. He basically had lived those, 17 years or something, as if Joseph had died. And so then it's almost as if he'd come back to life.
Right.
And
Can you
and-
imagine the emotional roller coaster
Yeah.
Jacob dealt with?
yeah, it was, Jacob's life is pretty incredible. There was a lot going on.
Yeah.
So anyway, so we have this, again, this is like one of these, like, God, this makes things more complicated as we go forward. Like, it just makes it's just hard. It's just complicated to understand because he's taking these boys, they're included in the inheritance. Like, it just, as it goes forward, it's like, this is really interesting. And then as, kind of the inheritance or these blessings are kind of spread between Judah and Ephraim and Manasseh and Joseph and all these different things, it's like, this is clearly, like, God is clearly, like, again, as we've seen previously, making the point that he decides how blessing, inheritance, all these things are transferred. And he's not just going to work within the patterns of the world. And so, and I'm not gonna take the time to split apart and dig into all of these prophecies in chapter 49. They are very interesting, and there are a lot of very interesting things in that chapter. But I kind of want to skip ahead to, and this is where I want to kind of spend the bulk of our time, kind of chapter. Well, it's actually the end of 49, I guess, after all of these prophecies, and Jacob has said, Jacob is about to, Jacob dies at the very end of chapter 49, and then we kind of have Joseph's process of grieving and eventually his death in chapter 50. So what is the significance of, so looking at the end of chapter 49, like verses 29, so these are kind of Jacob's final words to his sons. He says, then he charged them and said to them, I'm about to be gathered to my people, bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite, in the cave that is in the field of Machpelah, that is next to Mamre in the land of Canaan, the field that Abraham brought from Ephron and the Hittite as the property for burial. There they buried Abraham and his wife Sarah, there they buried Isaac and Rebekah, and there I buried Leah. The field was purchased from among the cave of the sons of Het. Why is he so specific about recounting this cave, this field that I bought from this person at this time, and these people are buried there? Why is he, like, recounting this in such detail?
Ownership of the land. That this was bought, therefore it's ours, and it keeps him back in the land, so that he's not buried in Egypt. This is very specific. Isn't this the first piece of property that Abraham actually purchased? It wasn't just given to them by God.
Right.
So there's a very significant, we bought this is ours.
Exactly. Yeah, at this point, this is the only piece of land that's actually owned by the Israelites. The people to become the Jewish people, the Israelites at this point, is what.
And him being buried there would maintain the ownership for another generation.
Yeah,
as
and
well.
yes, and I wonder if this is my mind wandering. This is not a scholarly opinion. This is my mind wandering. I wonder if he thought, if they have to go back and bury me, maybe they'll stay. I wonder if he thought, if they have to take me back, if they have to bury me there, it gets him back into the land. Because I think the way I read, as Jacob is leaving, and the events of Jacob leaving Canaan, Israel to go to Egypt, he's struggling with the fact that they're leaving the land because he knows the promise. He knows that it's supposed to be their land. And yet his entire family is now leaving to move down to Egypt. And he struggled with that. So I wonder, I don't know. I mean, and like, again, this is a pondering of mine. It's like, it's interesting. And he maybe doesn't know if they would be able to go and bury him there immediately, or if he would have a situation like Joseph, who's initially buried in Egypt, but he's going to ask that when they leave, which we'll talk about that in a minute. But anyway, this is significance is he's very clearly detailing that this is land that is legally owned by his family in the promised land, and regardless of whether or not he thinks they're going to stay, he probably, I don't know that he would have necessarily thought that. It's just something I was.
But that isn't his character, though. He will try to work a situation.
He will.
As Jacob,
it's true.
right?
It's
so
true.
it's not that far fetched to think that.
It's true.
And I think he knows they're going to be bringing them into the. I wonder if he discerned Pharaoh enough when he met him and blessed him that Joseph had to swear to him to take him into the land, because the way Pharaoh would view Joseph's promise to his dad, right? Like Joseph doesn't say that he put his hand underneath his thigh, but he was like, swear to me. And Joseph was like, I swear to you, right? So I think from that point, knowing Pharaoh, maybe he had the discernment to say, okay, Pharaoh will let them go. But again, we'll see in the next book, Shemot, that he doesn't let the children go. And I don't know if he doesn't let them go, but the men did go and the children stayed, right?
Well,
Yeah.
it's interesting too that it wasn't this Pharaoh that held the children of Israel and kept them from leaving. If it had been, they would have been able to leave pretty easily. But because it was the son of Pharaoh who did not know Joseph.
Right. Yeah,
That's the key
the
phrase.
change in leadership is significant in Exodus for sure.
Well, and also with this whole, with Jacob doing all of this, and your kind of minds, maybe, it also makes me wonder if Jacob isn't trying to make sure that what the Lord told him in chapter 46, where it's, do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will turn you into a great nation there. I myself will go down with you to Egypt, and I myself will also most certainly bring you up. Joseph will put his hands on your eyes. So he's charging this to Joseph, because it says Joseph will, so he isn't asking any of his other sons. He's talking to Joseph about it, not only because Joseph has authority in Egypt, but I think he's trying to make sure that what the Lord told him in chapter 46 here is fulfilled once he dies.
Right, because again, which is in line with how we see this kind of relationship developing between the people and Adonai, is that they hear God speak, but their understanding at this point is very much, okay, we heard God speak, it's our job to make it happen. Because they're still learning what it means to follow God, progressive revelation, right? And that, so I think there's an element of that, and I think we're also seeing play out, and we see it more clearly after, in what happens with Joseph's brothers after Jacob dies. That we're seeing Joseph's dreams play out, the dreams about everybody bowing down to him. We're seeing that play out in a really kind of interesting way. So really, this is bringing us kind of full circle, but.
I got a detailed question.
Oh, good.
If I was an English teacher, 29 through 31, I'd be redlining the heck out of it. 31, verse 31. Buried Abraham and his wife Sarah. There they buried Isaac and his wife Rebekah. And there I buried Leah, and then he adds a third cave. So, is he saying Abraham and Sarah were buried in the first cave, and Isaac and his wife Rebekah were buried in the second cave, and Leah got a cave all on her own?
I don't know, but my understanding is they're talking all about the same cave, that it's all one cave. the cave of Machpelah. He's just reiterating and calling it different things and lining out that this is the cave that was bought, and it fulfills all of these details. So my understanding has always been that they are all buried in the same cave.
But he mentions the other two just so we know he has them.
I guess I don't know how. I guess I'm not seeing more than one cave being mentioned.
What? There's a cave in the field of Ephron the Hittite.
Okay.
There's a cave in the field of
Machpelah. So that's the same cave.
That's the same cave.
He's saying it was bought and then it was named. So he's just giving a lot of detail of this, of all the lines of the in the cave. Repeating of their phase in the cave is confusing, but I think it's all the same cave. It was a cave that was bought from what's his face, Ephron the Hittite, which is also the cave in the field of Machpelah, which is also the cave that was purchased from the sons of Het.
and the cave that is purchased from the sons of Het.
Yeah.
So they're all the same cave.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd fail that one.
Yeah.
All right, glad we got that straight.
Very good.
I think too, perhaps he's reminding me, he's on his deathbed, whatever you say on your deathbed is going to resonate with somebody.
Yeah.
So he's reminding him,
Sure.
hey, you're in this new land,
Mhm.
you have all this land of Goshen within Egypt, you have all this charge to you to run Pharaoh's whole, land, but don't forget where you're from. Don't
Right.
forget our lineage, don't forget the God of, Abraham, Isaac, and Israel. Don't forget the land we come from, your true inheritance and your lineage. And I think that becomes an important part of Jewish culture, is passing down
Mhm.
your ancestry and
Yeah.
to the next generation, so that they know where they come from in a long line, not just us. Our kids know their grandparents, and
Right.
that's about it. There was a tradition of passing that all down, and I think this is, that poignant part that resonates, like, don't forget where you're.
Mhm.
And I think historically, resisting assimilation into other cultures
Mhm.
is very much a part of that.
Yeah.
Just
Mhm.
saying, hey, remember,
Right.
this is who we are.
Right. Which is one of the incredible things about the Jewish people.
Exactly,
Like,
that over 2,500, 3,000
Yeah.
years, they've
As many-
always maintained that
yeah,
one
as many
identity.
times as the Jewish people have been exiled from the land, that they've still maintained identity and language and all these things is incredible.
God is
Right.
faithful.
Yeah, so I think part of this is, I think this is one of the seeds of this being tied to the land. It's like, hey, we have this claim in this burial cave, which is really interesting. And this is one of the things I was thinking about, even just with these kind of, the end of Genesis being about the death of Jacob and Joseph, is that they're in Egypt that is known for their rituals surrounding death. Think about the pyramids
Oh, yeah.
and mummies and all of these things. Like, their culture is about death. It glorifies death in a very strange way. And so it seems that, I think another piece to this, I think everything that's been said is correct, I'm just adding yet another piece, is that Jacob, again, because God deals with this differently, is that he's not supposed to be buried in Egypt in the tradition of the Egyptians. He is to be buried in this land, which the significance of the this burial cave at Machpelah is not to glorify the dead, but to stake a claim on the land, right? Which is for the living. So I think interesting as we continue to even read, and I was and as we continue to discuss, I think the significance and how the Torah portrays death has to do with life. And I think that that's significant, because it even talks about, the way that it talks about people dying. Like at the end of chapter 49, when Jacob finished commanding his sons, he drew his feet up into the bed, then his breathes lasted and was gathered to his people. And we have that phrase is common in the Torah. He's gathered to his people, which does suggest, which is disputed in current Jewish tradition, that there is some kind of afterlife. There is something after death. We're not gonna go all the way to that right now, but there's this, and there's just this different kind of honoring that happens with death, but there's very much this, we see it, the narrative about death has to do with the living, and has to do with the continued, with the generational blessing, with the inheritance, with what's the next generation gonna do, what's the next generation gonna remember, and all of that. Did you have something, Richie?
I was gonna ask a question, but then you made me think of another question.
Oh.
The 40 days of embalming, was that, do you think that was a traditional thing, like something that Abraham and Isaac would have went through? It was
No.
totally
No,
Egyptian,
it's
right?
Egyptian.
That was, yeah, any kind of embalming and
Right.
even, cause yeah, we look at, and when we get to Joseph's death, he was embalmed and placed in a coffin, like, yeah, that's Egyptian tradition, not Jewish tradition.
Cause I even read a debate that's going on, was Joseph wrong to have embalmed him, because Jewish tradition believes that with, as righteous as the person was, their body wouldn't decay if they were
Mhm.
levels of righteousness. So there was this big debate on,
Yeah.
did Joseph do wrong by embalming this, since this was an Egyptian practice, not a Hebrew?
Yes, however, yes, that is true.
Mhm.
In a couple of the commentaries that I was reading, because I was thinking about some of that too, is that it says the physicians involved Israel. So it does seem that this embalming, or meaning Jacob, so the commentaries that I read, and I'm not an expert about this, so I'm just reiterating what I read, and you can take it or leave it, is that this was a different embalming than the normal Egyptian embalming, because that would have been done by the Egyptian priests, religious leaders, and this was done by, I think in Hebrew the word is healer, so that they've translated it here as physicians. This was done by not the person who normally embalmed in Egypt, is the point. And so it wasn't a religious embalming. It's still a question of like, well, why was he embalmed? I don't have an answer for that. But what I was reading is that there was some caveat or some nuance that it was a different type of embalming.
Could that be because Joseph was most likely overseeing it?
Probably, and I think this is somewhat of a political move, most likely. Which I think, because yes, Joseph has favor in Egypt, and they're being treated well in Egypt at this point. However, it does seem that Joseph thinks that this relationship does need to be managed in some sense. Because, and I say that partially because of this embalming. I think he was, I think it's possible, again, we don't have all the details in the text. I think it's possible that Joseph was like, all right, we can kind of do this, but we're going to do it differently to not, raise a bunch of issues in Egypt. And also then when but I actually also think, okay, stay with me, go with me here for a second. So the physicians embalmed him, and then they took 40 days for him because that's how long embalming takes, and Egypt wept 70 days. And so I think there's something of allowing, they had this good position in Egypt, they were thought highly of, and so I think that there's honoring the tradition and allowing the Egyptians to grieve. So I think that might be a piece. And then if we keep going, so when the days of formal weeping passed, Joseph spoke to Pharaoh's house, saying, if I found favor in your eyes, please say in Pharaoh's ears, my father made me take an oath, saying, behold, I'm about to die. In my tomb, which I dug for myself in the land of Canaan, there you must bury me. So now please allow me to go up and bury my father and then return. So Joseph has a really high position, but he is not speaking to Pharaoh himself. There's something going on here that's making him go through a different channel to make this request. He's speaking through, some other translations say like Pharaoh's council or his advisors or something like that. But it's basically he's going through someone else to make this request to Pharaoh, which seems strange since Joseph is second only to Pharaoh. So with having that level of position, it would seem that he would have the position that he could approach Pharaoh himself, and he doesn't. And so it could be a humility act, but I'm wondering if and because of some of the things that he's gonna say when he's about to die, we'll get there, I promise. If he is, I don't know, there's this tension because they're in a good position. At the same time, they're strangers in the land, and Pharaoh is ruling over them. Yeah.
Well, even with us now, the vice president can't just go in and see the president anytime she wants. She has to go through the chief of staff.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, so maybe it's protocols, possible also.
Yeah. The ESV translates it as the household of Pharaoh.
Yeah.
Which could imply family. That he approached the family, not necessarily immediately Pharaoh.
I think that's possible. I think in this context, I think household would imply more of servants and advisors and council members, you know, like people who work for Pharaoh more so necessarily than family, because
those still within the household.
And because of the pluralistic culture, we don't actually know that Pharaoh's family actually lives with him.
True.
I don't know. There's different ways to interpret it. So it's a little bit of a could be type of situation here. But but it does seem interesting that because again, if we keep going, so he approaches Pharaoh's whoever, he's going through this other channel. But then Pharaoh said, so even though he doesn't directly make the request to Pharaoh, Pharaoh is directly responding to him. So Pharaoh says, go up and bury your father just as he made you swear an oath. Okay, great. So it seems like everything is still good. However, keep going. So Joseph went up to bury his father. Also, all of Pharaoh's servants and the elders of his household and all the elders of the land of Egypt went with him. Again, this seems like this is still good. You know, they're honoring Jacob as well to be part of this burial process. Along with all of Joseph's house, his brothers and his father's household, only their children and their flocks and cattle were left in the land of Goshen. Chariots and horsemen also went up with him. It was a very impressive company. I like that we have that. This was a big deal, guys. Just in case you missed it, this is a big deal.
It's a major embassy.
I just think that's kind of funny. But they leave behind the children and cattle, and probably the women. We don't have specific mention of that. It's probably the women and the children. They probably didn't leave all the children by themselves.
Yeah.
To take care of all the animals. But so again, there's a couple different ways that we could understand this. One, practicality. They have all this livestock. Somebody's got to stay behind, so they leave behind, women and children. We can take into account, Pharaoh sends his servants, and there's all these Egyptian elders are going, which seems very honoring, probably was. And so we can just say, this makes a lot of sense. Another suggestion that I read is, they didn't, so going back to, did Jacob think that,
Make sure they came back.
yes, by leaving the livestock and everything, because this would have been the opportunity, well, let's just pack everything up and let's just go back.
Yeah.
But they're leaving something, they have to come back now, yeah.
But I was going to bring up earlier, in Genesis 15:13, where he told Abraham that it was going to be 400 years. Do you think that he would have passed that down?
Probably.
To Jacob?
Probably.
To Isaac and then to Jacob. So he may have had that in mind. So the earlier point, even though it definitely could be valid.
Yeah, they might have. It's hard to say. I mean, I think they probably did pass it down. I think, and maybe this is a situation. So here's my thinking. Just in the thinking about what we know about humanity, because we're all human. So we all know how humanity is would they have been, like, all right, we're settling in, we know we're going to be here. I mean, and I think there probably is some level to that. But it's also like, but what if, I think there's also this insecurity that rises up of like, but what if we don't get to go back? Now we have this opportunity. What if we just go now? What if, like, it's this human nature thing of, is God really going to do what he said?
And
we struggle with that.
And even the Egyptians going, but if we let them go up with everything, they won't come back.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, they keep not only their financial wealth, their
Mhm.
flock and their cattle, but their generational wealth, their children.
Yeah.
Keep them behind and say, if we keep them here, they have to come back.
Yeah.
That would be the mindset of the
Right.
Egyptians.
And even if, and I think that, and I think that that even is actually even valid, regardless of whether, because yes, maybe they are remembering, okay, they told Abraham it's gonna be 400 years, we know we're gonna be here for a while, but I think it's still, but even if they know that, the Egyptians maybe don't or wouldn't know how to respect that, so the Egyptians may have still required, okay, we need some insurance here. We need to know what, and so maybe there was part of that of like, we're gonna send Egyptians with you so that we know you're coming back, and you're gonna, we don't know again. So like, multiple ways we could look at this.
Well, that and the fact that, okay, Goshen was a really nice area.
Yeah.
They've established, they've obviously reproduced their cattle, they're doing well. It doesn't say that any of them yearned to leave Egypt.
Very true.
And so we often see that the people don't move and go where God wants them until things get rough, and
It's so
then they
true.
have to go. So, right now, they could be very content
That's true.
there.
Yeah.
They may know the prophecies, but right now, this is good land. We escaped a really bad famine. We've been really safe and secure
Mhm.
in Goshen. Doesn't say they're under any kind of persecution yet.
Mhm.
So there could just be we're
Yeah,
not ready
maybe
to
they
leave
wanna
right
come
now.
back.
This
Yeah,
is-
for
We've
sure.
established ourselves here right now. We're cool.
Yeah.
Or it just wasn't the time.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I
it
mean-
wasn't the time, we know that, but.
Yes.
Well, I
Yes.
mean,
But they didn't.
because they were going for a particular purpose,
Mhm.
and to decide to relocate at this,
Yeah. Yeah, it does. Yeah, you're right. And
it's unsettling.
right. I think
Yeah.
I think these are all great points. I think yes.
And the underlying terror of Joseph, right? Because that seems to resurface after Jacob dies,
Yes.
right? They're really afraid of him.
Right.
And then his father psychologically put his foot on some of their throats with the blessings,
Yeah.
right? The prophecies. So I don't
Mhm.
know how apt Reuben would have been. Wait a second, I'm his excellency, the beginning of his power, but I shall not exceed?
Mhm.
I mean, that would jack me up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so, yeah, I think this is all really good. I think, part of what I want us to see with this is with this death of Jacob, I think it reopens a lot of these questions. And so I think you're right. I think as we sit here and think through this, I think all this makes sense. Yes, they knew they were supposed to be there for 400 years. Yes, they were probably living a good life. They were going for the purpose of burying their father, so they probably weren't thinking about picking up and moving right now. Like, I think this all makes sense, but at the same time, you see, we see even in the text, I don't know, I can kind of see in the text this tension of like, okay, yes, we know all of that. At the same time, at the death of it becomes vulnerable. There's this vulnerability that comes with the death of the patriarch, and I think that's what I was thinking about this. So, rabbit trail shortly into this, what I was thinking about this week. Just a second, of like thinking about the death of Jacob, and then we're going to talk about Joseph here in just a second. But it's like when the head of the family dies and that passes
Right.
on, or someone just with a really significant position in the family, like it does seem to disrupt the dynamic of the family. And because I was thinking about that even in my own family. I had a great aunt of mine pass away last year, or at the beginning of this year actually. It's been almost a year, and she held this kind of role, and so I've actually thought about this this year of like the dynamic of my extended family is changing because she's gone, and it's like, so I think some of this that's playing out, like Joseph is navigating, Joseph is in this really unique role, but he's already been in this role of authority, but he's having to navigate, okay, how do I, deal with the Egyptians and also my father's wishes, knowing we're going to stay here for a while, but I still need to bury him there, and eventually that's where people are going to go. Like it's like, okay, all of a sudden this gets more complicated. And then Well, did you have something before we?
Well, I was basically gonna say the same thing,
Mhm.
because conceptually, they understood that Jacob was at the end of his life.
Mhm.
But when he actually died,
Yeah.
it goes beyond conception to actually, okay, now this is real, what do we do?
Mhm.
And I've experienced the same thing in the last few years. No one expects their parent to not be immortal.
Mm.
A child never expects a parent to die. A child always thinks a parent is going to live. And then when they're gone, the world changes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that might be exactly what both Joseph
Mhm.
and the other brothers were experiencing.
Right.
The reality is here now. Jacob is gone. And there's
Yeah.
also a period of time between Jacob's death and Joseph's death. It's not
Yeah.
an immediate thing.
Right, right.
So they have years
Yeah.
to get used to the idea.
Yeah, and this is also, again, this plays into the where we are, just even in the narrative of the Torah, of we're coming to the end of this kind of patriarchal thing. Because like you think about, we talk about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We don't keep going, right?
Right.
We don't say the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph and Ephraim and Manasseh and then. Like, it stops, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Not that the blessing of that, the patriarchal blessing, of course, over Israel continues. Like, I'm not saying the covenant is broken or anything like that, so don't hear that. Because, of course, as we talked about several weeks ago, the Abrahamic covenant is this unbreakable covenant with the Jewish people.
Amen.
But we start to see the family expanding. And so I think this is also the time, this is also the point where, because we can go back and we can read the passages of God himself reiterating to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob this basically the same wording almost exactly of, I will be your God and you will be my people. I will, your seed will be as numerous as the stars. All this different language of the Abrahamic covenant is continued through Isaac and Jacob, and then we don't see God showing up and saying those specific things again. And so, as Jacob is blessing Ephraim and Manasseh, he sort of extends this blessing, and talks about the God of my fathers. May they be called by thy name and by the name of my fathers, and may they be multiplied the multitude in the midst of the land. So Jacob kind of continues, imparts this blessing, but we don't see God showing up and saying this. And so again, like I'm pointing out, this is a shifting point in the narrative. Not that it negates any of that happened, but it just is. It's this next level of how God is interacting with the people, which we continue to see through Exodus. So let's keep going and see how this continues to play out. So again, they're going up to. So they go up to Canaan and they go up to bury. Again, we have the details of that they are burying him in that specific cave. They reiterate those details again, and then they return. So then we have this situation where after Jacob dies, the brothers become a bit concerned. And again, this goes back to this idea that, the dynamic of a family shifts when, the head of the family is gone. And they say, maybe Joseph will be hostile towards us and pay us back in full for all the evil we showed him. And then they kind of call on the name of their father to say, hey, our father said, you have to forgive us. And so.
Did he though?
I don't think we have that. I think this is
all made up.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think the sentiment is real, but
The sentiment is real.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
but we don't know that. Yeah, we don't know that specifically.
Dad
said
said.
because what we're seeing is their fear, right? They're afraid. They're like, maybe all this was because of our father. He was so happy to see his father again that he treated us kindly as well. And now that he's gone, all bets are off. It's going to be terrible. And I think, But I think that Joseph's response says a lot about him, because he weeps.
Yeah.
You know, like, I think he's grieved that his brothers still think of him this way. And granted, you know, think back to the beginning of the Joseph narrative and his, you know, arrogant, cocky little self, of, hey, I had these dreams, you all are gonna serve me, get ready for that, guys, like, you know, and how he, you know, then his brothers are like, you have no idea what you've just done.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not very happy about it. But I think that his,
Brother rubs it in.
you know, the life, the trajectory of his life, which is always what we're looking at with the patriarchs, because obviously they're not perfect. Any character in the Bible, really. This is what we're looking at, is where their life is going, not this, yeah, they did something stupid. But I think this shows, you know, this trajectory of Joseph's life. It's like he really loves his family, and he loves his brothers, and he is, I think he is doing, I see evidence that he is doing his best to use his position of power in Egypt to bless his family and to preserve their lives. And to, you know, God, you know, even God's plan of, like, I think he sees his role as the one who, that his brothers will bow down to, as, I think that he has a level of humility in that. That he lacked initially when he received these dreams. And I think his intention is really to preserve life and to preserve the family. And I think that he's grateful that his family is there and that they're together.
And by extension, God uses that to preserve others
Right.
besides his family.
Right.
Emma, something that I've thought about for a very long time. We assumed that he was arrogant because he told about the dreams, but being a younger sibling myself, I'm not necessarily willing to put that motive on him, because we don't know. And also, when you're a younger kid and you got all these older brothers and it's like you have this dream, what are you gonna do? You're excited about the dream, you know, whoa, look what I just dreamt, this is,
Yeah.
and he may have had a total attitude of, this is really like, what does this mean? Or he could have had a completely different attitude that was totally misread by his brothers. And the fact that later you see how he is in prison and his attitude toward, you know, and he's still having dreams, humility isn't just like, oh, I'm a terrible person. Humility is a strength of knowing that you are low, and moving in who you are and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know that I would technically be willing to say that Joseph was an arrogant young kid, even though his brothers thought that. And the other question I had was, well, not really a question, the question earlier about the embalming of Jacob. If you look at the practicality of what embalming does, it kind of, doesn't it help the decay process smell less and be less messy and stuff like that? So since they knew they were going to be taking Jacob on a distant journey, I don't know how long it takes to go from Goshen to wherever the case of Machpelah. Maybe that was one reason for embalming him, was to make it easier on everybody else to have his body transported. Did they put it in a box when they transported it? You know, how did they transport a body back then? So I don't know. I'm thinking more in a practicality kind of way.
And I think that could be true. And I think, I think that that's possible. I think, and especially if he was gonna allow the Egyptians to mourn for that long. Yes, you know, by then you're a couple months past death. That's not a pleasant situation. So I think it's possible.
It was just a Jewish debate that I read.
And I think Jewish tradition now is, you know.
Well, the study notes that I have in my ESV suggest that the Hebrew time of mourning was 10 to 30 days, but the Egyptians was more than twice that long.
Yeah.
And perhaps to accommodate the time of travel as well.
That's what I was
the
thinking.
time of mourning worked.
Yeah, and I think
to do it.
Yes.
The Egyptian way.
And so I think later Jewish tradition would not really allow for that. But we also do see some seeds of Jewish tradition in that once they go up to where does it say it? Yeah, when they go up to Machpelah, somewhere it says I think it says that they were there for 7 days. I thought it was in this passage, maybe I'm wrong.
That was the actual Shiva.
Yeah. And that's, yeah, because that is now Jewish tradition, you have 7 days, I mean.
Verse 10.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, they obey the 7 days of mourning. So this is part of current Jewish tradition, that the first 7 days are like intense mourning, and depending on the family member, there's a lot of Jewish tradition about mourning, but that's even where they say this would come, this is kind of the first mention of that, of sitting that 7 days, yes.
I had a question about what you said earlier about them saying, the brothers saying, Pop said you have to forgive us, that type of thing. And I was wondering, like, with Joseph, with them weeping on each other and everything like that, and I don't want to doubt the sincerity of the brothers and the love there, but was there true reconciliation between them for them to come back and say that? And if by reconciliation, were they truly repentant in their hearts? And I question that because Joseph is really the only one we see walking with God. I think the only time that we hear any mention of God from the brothers is God paying us back, right, for what we did. So I really would love to know more about their walk, and their faith, or was it their lives just caught up in the daily business of running a camp?
Yeah.
And so could I add on to that? Did I miss it in our reading that did the brothers ever confess to their father what they had done? I don't know if that even happened, and it could be that much of their mood was out of fear rather than sincerity, and not all of
guilt. Fear and guilt.
I think Jacob knew, because in his thing that he says about Joseph, right, in the well and the branches and everything,
right.
I think there's a lot of imagery there that suggests that, he was betrayed and he was down in that hole. I mean, I'm definitely reading that into it and pulling that out of it when Jacob prophesies over Jacob. So I don't know that we have any written evidence of it, but I feel like Jacob did know. How did you get here?
At the end of chapter 45, Jacob did know.
What does it say?
It says that in verse 25, then they went up from Egypt and came to the land of Canaan to Jacob their father. They told him, saying, Joseph is still alive, and he is the ruler of the whole land of Egypt. But they also told him all of Joseph's words that he had told them. When he saw the wagons that Joseph had sent to pick him up, the spirit of their father Jacob revived. Then Israel said, enough, my son Joseph is still alive. I must go and see him before I die. So he did know.
Well, we don't know what he knew.
Yeah.
We don't know that he knows. We know that he thinks Joseph is dead. We don't know
what happened.
That he knows that his brothers plotted to kill him and then sold him.
That's true.
So
but they know he's alive.
They know he's alive, but we don't know what version of the story about what happened between Jacob thinking that he had died and finding out that he's alive.
Yeah.
But the deal where they come to Joseph and say, well, Dad said you should forgive us, that's pretty cheesy. But in the same token, I think it's a measure of how aware they were of the extent of what they did was terribly wrong. So they needed Dad's support for this. They felt like they needed that.
Yeah.
Well, maybe that's fulfilling the prophecy too, where they would bow down to him.
Yes.
And that's ultimately the culmination of that prophecy.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
them bowing down to him and recognizing his authority over them.
Yes. I think that's a piece of it. Okay, so let me go back and try to bring all this together here, because we've had there's lots of things. Okay, so going back to Joseph initially having the dream, I think it's possible that he wasn't so arrogant. He was a teenager, so he probably was arrogant in some way, because most teenagers are. Your brain's not fully developed and you're very individually focused.
Yeah.
It's possible, but maybe he wasn't. Maybe he was just trying to share. The result is that they hated him. He's questioned by his father. So this, and also in combination with his father's favoritism of him, there's a difficult dynamic, regardless of his actual motivation. So yes, there's some of that is conjecture. So I still think that we've seen progression in how he relates to his brothers, because I think that he's showing a different way of interacting with them. So as far as reconciliation, when they come down and when they bring Benjamin down, and when his father comes down and he reveals himself as Joseph to his brothers, there's a lot of weeping, and it does seem that he at least accepts his brothers, it seems with joy, and with, he's glad to see them, and he wants to with some level of reconciliation. Do we have evidence of repentance? No. Do we know what story Jacob has been told about this whole situation? No. Many think that he doesn't fully know the details of this. Do we know the rest of the brothers, what their relationship was with God? Not really. One of the only hints that we really have is this story, is that strange account that's thrown in there of Judah and Tamar, where he does seem to be recognizing at least God's involvement within that particular story. But yeah, we don't specifically know, because this narrative is so focused on Joseph. We don't know what the rest of the brothers are really doing and how they're regarding God. So there's a lot we don't know. But as far as, so going back to this whole situation, I think that it would seem, because I think the brothers have this fear that that Jacob is gone, and so Joseph is now going to kind of switch gears and become hostile toward them and say, all right, Dad's gone, now I'm really gonna hold you accountable for what you did to me. But it doesn't seem to me that is Joseph's heart, and that's what he conveys then when he talks about, do not be afraid, for am I in the place of God? Because he's still, so regardless of whether we know how much he regarded God before he went down to Egypt, from the time he's in Egypt and in prison and all of these things, he credits God with interpretation of dreams, with preserving the people, with providing the food to get through the famine, all these things. He's crediting God for all of that, so he's continuing here. Yes, you yourselves planned evil against me. God planned it for good in order to bring about what it is this day, to preserve the lives of many people. So now don't be afraid. I myself will provide food for you and your little ones. So he reassured them, speaking kindly to them. And then, we know that he remained, and he sees up to the third generation. And we're going to talk about his death. And I'm very briefly going to talk about his death. We're going to make it. So I think that the brothers still have some conviction. But again, we don't really know exactly how that has played out. But Joseph is, and of course, with their kind of, there's, right before that, the brothers say, behold, we're your slaves. So this is definitely this fulfillment of these dreams of the brothers bowing down to him. But I do think, regardless of how we want to look at motives and how we want to look at what's going on behind the scenes of this story, I think this probably has played out differently than Joseph initially thought when he got these dreams. I have no idea how you would imagine that playing out initially when you're a teenager having a dream about this. But I don't know that he foresaw all of this necessarily. But the point is, he sees the purpose of it now for the preservation of the life, and that's I think what we're supposed to see, and that's this famously quoted, God planned it for good. It was what you planned for evil, God planned for good. And seeing this redemption. And then, just really briefly, I want to make just a couple points because we need to wrap up. But so then, just these last few verses, when Joseph's about to die. He says, then Joseph said to his brothers, I'm about to die, but God will surely take notice of you and will bring you up from this land to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Then Joseph made Israel's sons swear an oath, saying, when God takes notice of you, you will bring my bones up from here. So Joseph died at 110 years old, and they embalmed him, and he was placed in a coffin in Egypt. So, we have we're at this point of tension again. This is the end of this patriarchal period. As we move into, Exodus, and we have the birth of Moses and everything that's going to happen there, it's a very different type of story, and we see a lot of progression in how the people relate to God. So Joseph, with this death of Joseph, he is certainly reminding them and preparing them, you're here for now, but eventually God is going to move you. And so remember this, take my bones with you, because it's this tension of they're living in Egypt, they're going to continue living in Egypt. Probably, again, at this point, probably quite happy to be there, not living a bad life. Let's not forget they were experiencing, right up before this, what got them to Egypt was this experience of famine, and so Egypt is what kept them alive, so that tends to count for something. But he is still looking toward, and this is again this theme, and this becomes, this is even, the theme of the Jewish people throughout, from that point in history forward, is always looking toward being back in the land. There is like this land promise that anchors them, along with the, just this preservation, all these things about the Abrahamic covenant. And so Joseph is making note of that. He's like, and I kind of see it a little bit, I think you can take this different ways, but part of it is this reminder of like, you're not going to be here forever. I wonder, again, this is another one of my ponderings of like, did he know that it was going to get bad for them? Did he know that it was going to become, I think he probably did eventually, but it's like,
Did who know, Joseph?
Did Joseph know that, the tides were going to turn? It seems that he's passing away where there's still this level of favor, but then we know that, it's going to change. And so I wonder what he thinks of their, if he thinks it's going to be as bad as it was. If he may think, eventually, they are kind of in captivity. There's things that go along with that, but I wonder if he knew that it was going to be as bad as it was.
Well, he had a little bit more favor with Pharaoh than they did.
He did, yes.
But
And
at
he
this
going away.
point, I'm wondering if it's still the same Pharaoh at the death, because now he's starting to say, when God notices you. So I don't think there was the freedom at the death point.
Yeah.
Because he wouldn't be making that kind of statements that God's going to take notice of you.
That's true.
And it was about 50 years after Jacob's death that Joseph died. 55 years.
Well, even with
so
the
there
first
was
Pharaoh,
a period
there was,
of time to change.
Yeah, not that trust. When he sends all his counsel, his elders up with him, he doesn't fully trust him. Even though he's number two, you're not family, buddy. I'm going to send my people to keep an eye on you. Make sure you don't come back with an army or just stay gone or whatever.
Yeah, I think there's always this. I think there's this underlying. You are outsiders.
You are also shepherds.
Yeah. Right. So there are these hints, because I think
we don't trust.
And so I think it's helpful, for me at least, it's helpful to take a little bit of notice of that things seem to be shifting gradually, because otherwise it seems very harsh, and it seems very abrupt shift to all of a sudden, get to the end of Genesis, if we have this mindset of like, oh, they're doing great, and then all of a sudden you flip over and you're like, and now they don't like us anymore. It's like, I think the tides were starting to shift before that, and so I think there's some level of like, they're trying to leave these hints of preparation for this, but
there was a lot of jealousy between Pharaoh's son and Moses. So that had to have come from somewhere. At that point they didn't really know he was Jewish, but or son of Israel, or however you want to say that at that point. So where that rivalry started and that, you know, that vying and the jealousy, there had to have been a lot of jealousy that was in there. I mean, Joseph was not an Egyptian, yet he was risen to that level. So we don't know what was going on in Pharaoh's offspring's minds, so.
Right.
Yeah, there seems to be, you know, regardless of, I mean, I don't know. I think there's, eventually the fact that they are not Egyptian is a problem for the Egyptians.
Yeah.
The Egyptians are not happy with them having any level of power, and receiving special treatment, which again is a theme that carries forward for the Jewish people.
And receiving the best of the land.
Yeah.
It's a multi-generational story, both for the sons of Jacob and the Egyptians. So multiple generations down the line, Egyptians going, who are you? How did you get the best?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things at play, and I think that one of the things that, and I want to circle back to this is kind of where we started, and then we're going to wrap up because we need to go to service. But I think that part of what seems to bring about some of these changes are the deaths of these important people. Because look at the reaction of Joseph's brothers when their father dies, and then look at the reaction when Joseph dies, because ultimately Joseph dying is kind of what sets about this, or continues this shift in how the Egyptians are thinking of them. And just even, and if we had had more time, I had gotten here more quickly, I would have gotten into this. But even think about the death of Yeshua, because that's what this was making me think about. Because Joseph is actually one of the best kind of precursor shadows of Messiah in the Old Testament. And just even so, thinking about how they reacted to his death and how they reacted, and there's not a lot. I went back and I read the end of all 4 Gospels last night, but it's of how the disciples responded. And we don't have a lot of detail about it, but there's a lot of fear. Like the words that were mentioned were things like fear, refusing to believe, needing proof, like when Yeshua is resurrected. They've all gone away, which there's different ways to interpret some of that. The part of it is the festival's over, they're going home. Part of it is they have been following someone who says they're Messiah. There's a lot of political ramifications up to and including death for following a false Messiah, that if he's really not going to be resurrected, we kind of want to get out of Jerusalem because our lives are not safe. So, I mean, again, like Yeshua's death, even though, of course, we know the rest of the story, but think about those couple of days after Yeshua's death. We see the response in the disciples. You know, of course, Miriam, both Miriams, Mother Miriam and Miriam of Magdala, like they seem to be, you know, and these other women, because they want to prepare, but they're still they're preparing his body. They're preparing as if he's going to stay dead, you know? So it's you see how his death shifted them. Of course, it shifts again when he's resurrected and then ascends. And so it's not the full story, but you can see I don't know, there's a lot of weight to that, and it does shift. Yeah. It shifts the story in an important way, and we don't talk about that. It's such a short period of time. We have so little information about it, but it's thinking about, you know, Yeshua's death even had that impact, and then his closest friends, who he'd been telling them, this is what's about to happen. Keep the faith. I'm coming back. Just hold on. He's telling them, and they don't get it, and it's and it shifts, you know, all these different things, and even, you know, he's up on the cross, and they're like, aren't you supposed to be the king of the Jews? We shouldn't be able to crucify you. So I don't know. I think it's significant to see how that impacts, and to reflect about that, and how do we navigate some of that, when these people who have, you know, the head of the family kind of role. Of course, Yeshua brings about all this redemption to it, because he, of course, is alive. But even just, I don't know, I just was really thinking about that. So I guess I'm going to leave you with that pondering question in this week leading up to Christmas, because again, death is actually about life. And so, because even Yeshua's death, it's I don't know, the lives of the people, it impacted the lives of his followers. even for just those couple of days, and then of course he's resurrected, but it's, and then how that impacts the life of his followers, and then we're waiting for him to come back. I don't know, it's all these pieces. There's a lot of moving pieces to this, I get that, and I don't know that I'm doing a great job of wrapping it up, but just thinking about all that impact, and thinking about the impact of Jacob's death and Joseph's death was just really hitting me, and just because of the responses that it brings from people. And so I think there's something in us to reflect on, of like when we have those moments of, you know, these really significant people in our lives, and how that impacts us, and how we should let it impact us. And I think it should have impact, but just kind of what that means. So I will pray to wrap up my very kind of messy ending here, and we will go to service. So Lord, we just thank you again for this day. We thank you for Shabbat. We thank you that we get to worship together, Lord. We thank you, we just thank you for the life of Yeshua. We thank you for all that we can learn from him, Lord. We thank you for all that we can learn from all of Scripture, from Genesis to Revelation, that it's about your character, Lord, that it's about how you want to interact with us, and how you want us to respond to challenging moments in life, and how you want to write the story in a way that doesn't follow the patterns of this world, but shows your sovereignty, Lord. And we thank you for that, and we just ask that you would continue to reveal what that means in each of our lives, and as we continue to navigate situations that we don't expect, that we would see you show up, and that we would know your character through those things, Lord. I thank you for your presence. I thank you for your word, and I thank you for this group of people who came to study your word today, Lord. B'Shem Yeshua.
Thank you.